This session is about highlighting the importance of reducing overwhelming stimuli to ensure we don't create cognitive overload when teaching. And it's essential that we do this in order to move on to stretching and challenging opportunities, because we must lay the foundations to new learning in the simplest forms in order to build that deep knowledge. Okay, so this first slide, if we were doing the hour-long session, I would do an experiment on you, which would be getting you to listen to two things at exactly the same time. I don't know what's happened there to my slide, but we'll ignore it. So how much of each of the things can you take in when you're hearing them at the exact same time? Well, there's some science going on. So scientists amongst us, please don't shoot me for this science that I'm going to read from my PowerPoint. So and if I say things incorrectly, apologies. So we've got the Brock-Wernicke, which allows us to understand oral speech. It's in one side of our brains, and for most of us, it's on the left-hand side. And although we can take in basic sounds of language because they're initially processed on both sides of the brain, oral speech, it has to be funneled into this, like the diagram, singular brain network, which leads to a bottleneck. So when we're hearing two things at the same time, only one of those voices will go through and be processed, because the left inferior gyrus, this blocks one voice so the other can get through. So theory into practice, how often are you playing a video for your students and narrating over the top? Okay, so us in drama, we love to share a video, but my problem before I read this incredible book, Stop Talking, Start Influencing, I love to narrate over the top of the video, like giving my 2 cents on things, when actually this is just confusing the students, because they can't listen to my voice and listen to the important things in the video at the same time. So let's have a look at experiment 2 then. In experiment 2, and you're going to start doing this now, but don't read that paragraph. If you read that paragraph and try to listen to my voice at the same time, you cannot do it, because what happens is, and I'm going to just change my slide, when you're reading something in silent reading, your brain will turn your silent reading into an internal voice. So much like hearing two voices at the same time, you will start to hear your internal voice, hear the outside voice, and you will only be able to process one. So we think about this in practice. How often are we getting students to read from the slide, but also we're narrating over the top of it? We need to stop doing this, particularly if we've got slides that are heavy with words. You either want the students to read the slide, or you want the students to listen to your own voice, okay? It's something else we need to think about here is diagrams. So it's how we're using maybe diagrams and pictures within our presentation. So, for example, I've got my lovely diagram here. I've already mentioned some of these words to you, but perhaps some of these words are ones that you're not very familiar with, and your brain is working hard to understand what those words maybe mean, going back into your memory of your science lessons to understand them. I'm narrating over the top of it. It's already a lot for your working memory. So what I need to make sure I'm doing when I'm using these diagrams is I am giving you very clear explanations. I'm not going to, but clear explanations of what each of these keywords mean, because that's going to be really important for you to develop this in as deep knowledge, the foundations. Something that came out, and I hate to mention it, but I want to, out of kind of Ofsted observations, was that they wanted to identify what the cognitive load was on students and how teachers were managing this. So if you haven't yet been struck with Ofsted, this will be something to think about in your lessons, is what are you doing to support, cognitive load and how to reduce it. Okay, so with presentations then, there is some science somewhere. This is only the 10-minute version, so I can't give it all to you. There's some science somewhere that says you can only use 7 keywords maximum kind of in a lesson for students to learn and really fully understand in any one time. So there's some science somewhere, you can Google it, but this is my suggestion to you: 7 new keywords that they will be able to learn. We need to think about our graphs and our tables. We need to make sure that we're giving them verbal explanations. As I've previously mentioned, we need to make sure that these explanations are simple. We need to make sure that our diagrams are not overloaded with text. We need to highlight and simply explain the new key terminology with 7 as our magic number. Interestingly, through the science, and when an image isn't labeled and having someone verbally explaining the image, this has less of an impact on our working memory than an image with words and us explaining it, because obviously now with the science, your brain is having to do a lot more when there are actual words on it. However, we know that to get that deep understanding, seeing those words, seeing how they're spelt, all of that is going to help. It's really important, though, that we make sure that we are giving really clear, specific explanations. One relevant image. Do not overcrowd your presentations with unnecessary pictures, because again, this will have an impact on the working memory. And it seems so obvious to say that, but really, if you go back and have a look through maybe some of your presentations, have you just thrown in a picture for the sake of it to make it look a bit more jazzy? Take it out, because it's doing too much to their brains. Okay, so technically I've only got 2 minutes left, but this can totally finish at 5. So laying the foundations then. We must lay the foundations with prerequisite knowledge and skills in its simplest form. If we want to get that deep knowledge, the deep learning, we've got to start with the basics, making it very, very simple. And then we can start scaffolding to then stretch and challenge. So questions to consider moving forwards is: how do you assess student understanding before learning a new topic? What do they already know? And how are you doing that? Are you doing that in a way that's not going to overwhelm them? And then how do you introduce that new topic? So thinking about these things that I've said before. So now we've laid the foundations. What are we doing to support our students further? So here's a little bit more brain science for you. And so once we've established that, we begin to challenge our students. We want to get them learning deep and effectively. We want to embed it into that long-term memory. So how can we do this? Now, high levels of stress will impair the learning. Moderate levels of stress will actually improve learning, and low levels of stress impairs the learning just as much as high level stress. And I think that's something really, you need to really consider this carefully, because sometimes we think, oh, let's just make the lesson less stressful. No, don't do that, because it's going to do terrible things to their neurons. I'm going to talk you through that science right now. So the hippocampus is a gateway to our memories, and billions of neurons are processing all of the new information, and this leads to the foundations of new memories. Now, when we're stressed, high level stress, like super high level stress, cortisol floods the hippocampus. Moderate levels of stress will still flood the hippocampus with cortisol, but less. Now, as soon as that happens, it triggers something beginning with NN, a really long word that I can't pronounce. This goes into the amygdala, and the amygdala then releases ARC protein. And this combats, and I have to do these actions because I'm a drama teacher, this combats the cortisol. And the battle between the ARC proteins and the cortisol releases something really magical, a magic potion in our brains called the FGF2. And this protein embeds itself throughout the hippocampus, and it leads to the growth of new neurons, which means more memory. So if the stress levels continue, more cortisol is released into the hippocampus. However, our ARC proteins all dry up. So we don't have this beautiful battle of creating the FGF2, and the cortisol ends up killing all the neutrons. So what we want then is we want moderate levels of stress. We want moderate levels of stress in our lessons and through our teaching, because this will help to promote the growth of new neurons. So what I want you to think about, and I've got 3 minutes, what I want you to think about is, how are you building into your lessons this moderate elements of stress? And I know that might seem a little bit backwards, but it's not. It is good. It is going to build those new neurons to help that long-term memory. Okay, my next one, just very, very quickly. Pop quiz. How many senses do human beings typically have? Who invented the light bulb? And in naval lingo, what does Morse code SOS stand for? So you've got your answers there. Now, what we're thinking about here is error. Now, mental models then are important because they get the brain forming new mental maps. This reflects the physical layout and the different environments. And when this happens, our brains start to make predictions and it guides our future behaviors. Now, you have already taken part in this because I did that pop quiz with you, and you have instantly gone back and you've thought about what you believe those answers to be. Now, when there's a conflict in our brains between the prediction and the reality, this causes a little blip in the brain, and we call this error positivity. Now, with the anterior cingulate cortex, which is just behind your forehead, this blip changes according to the size of the conflict. Now, when this happens, the ventral attention network activates and the subconscious monitors all of the information being blocked by the attention filter. My attention's gone because it's nearly 5 o'clock now. But stay with me. Then the body and the brain slow, and any new information in the prefrontal cortex is abandoned. Now, this process forces our attention to the error and frees up resources to analyze the conflict and update the mental model. So in simplest forms, as I've just been banging on about making things really, really simple, this means that when you recognize that you have made an error based on a mental map that you believe, so most of you probably think, maybe, and maybe you all know the answer to this, but perhaps lots of you think that there are 5 senses. We all maybe said 5, but that's in fact wrong. So as soon as I'm telling you that there are not 5 senses, okay, hopefully there aren't loads of scientists watching this, there's more than that. As soon as I'm telling you that, all of this sciencey stuff is happening, and you're going to recreate and write a new mental model for you, because actually there are 17 senses. Yeah. Gosh, no, yes, there really is, Anne. There's 17 senses. I didn't know this either. Who invented the light bulb? Many of you might have said it was Edison, but actually there were many people who invented the light bulb before Edison patented the idea, and Warren LaRue was one of them. Now, in naval lingo, what does Morse code SOS stand for? Perhaps you thought it meant save our souls, but it means absolutely nothing. It's just the simplest form of Morse code. Now, I'm telling you this, telling you all of this because what I want you to do is to learn from the failure. And I want you to start thinking about how you can embed learning from failures in your lessons, because the science suggests that if we can highlight misconceptions to our students, their deep level learning will be deep. So that is it from me.